Millionaire came desperate for milk. She opened her heart and became the child's mother. Hello, my precious, irreplaceable family. Welcome back to Mr. Peter Stories. Every time I show up here, I carry you all in my heart. I am with you in your joy, your pain, your silence, and your smiles. You are not just names on a screen. You are my family, my strength, my purpose. But today, I need to speak from the heart, with honesty. Why are we not getting the love we once did? Why must I remind you to like and comment? This family has always been my pride. Don't make me feel like I'm shouting into the wind. Your comments, your love, your I am with you, they are the heartbeat of this space. To the beautiful new souls who've joined us, welcome home. You may be new, but you already belong. I promise to give you stories that will make you feel, cry, smile, and believe in love again. Some families are born, ours was chosen, and chosen love is the strongest of all. So please, don't wait for me to beg. If this place matters to you, if I matter to you, like this video and comment, I am with you. Let's show the world how deeply we stand together. To my old warriors, guide our new ones. Show them that here they are not just seen, they are loved beyond words. Let's begin today's story, hand in hand, as one family, forever. The digital clock on Scott Drew's nightstand glowed, 3:17 a.m., as baby Lily's cries pierced through the darkness. He'd been pacing his apartment for over 2 hours, bouncing his 4-month-old daughter against his chest while she screamed with a desperation that echoed his own. "Come on, sweetheart, please," Scott whispered, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his brown hair stuck up in every direction from running his hands through it. 3 days. It had been exactly 3 days since. Veronica walked out, leaving only a hastily scrawled note. "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry." Scott had found the note when he came home from work that evening, expecting to find his wife feeding Lily or resting while the baby slept. Instead, he'd found silence, empty drawers, and a crying infant who seemed to sense her world had shifted. Now, staring at the empty formula container, Scott felt panic rising in his chest. The last formula had been mixed at midnight, and every store in his neighborhood was closed until 6 a.m. Lily's cries grew more desperate, her tiny fists beating against his chest as she searched for comfort he couldn't provide. "I'm so sorry, baby girl," he murmured, pressing his lips to her soft head. "Daddy doesn't know what to do." At 30 years old, Scott had built a successful consulting business and owned a beautiful apartment. He'd married Veronica 3 years ago, believing they wanted the same things: family, stability, a future together. When Lily was born, he'd felt like the luckiest man alive. But somewhere between sleepless nights and constant demands, Veronica had started pulling away. The apartment felt enormous and empty now. Scott had bought this place when Veronica was pregnant, imagining birthday parties and Christmas mornings, filled with laughter. Now it just echoed with his daughter's cries and his own desperate whispers. He tried everything: warm water with sugar, which Lily rejected immediately. A pacifier, which he spat out angrily. He even called the 24-hour nurse hotline, but their advice to try soothing her until morning felt useless when his daughter was clearly starving. By 3:30 a.m., Scott made a decision that would have seemed impossible a week ago. He wrapped Lily in her warmest blanket and headed outside. Maybe someone, somewhere, would be awake. Maybe someone would have formula to spare. The October night air was sharp and cold as Scott stepped outside, holding Lily close against his chest. Most of the windows in the surrounding apartment buildings were dark, but as he walked down the quiet street, he spotted a soft light glowing in a second-floor window of the building across from his. Scott stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, Lily's cries cutting through the silence of the night. The light was warm and steady, not the flickering blue of a television, but the gentle glow of a lamp. Someone was awake. Taking a deep breath, Scott climbed the steps to the building's entrance and pressed the buzzer for apartment 2B. He waited, his heart pounding almost as loudly as Lily's cries. Nothing. He pressed it again, longer this time, and waited. After what felt like forever, a woman's voice crackled through the intercom. "Hello? I'm so sorry to bother you this late. My name is Scott Drew. I live across the street. I have a 4-month-old baby, and she's hungry, but all the stores are closed and I don't have any formula left. I saw your light and I don't know what else to do." Lily's cries filled the silence. Scott closed his eyes, preparing for rejection. Instead, the buzzer sounded. When he reached the second floor, a door was already open, revealing a young black woman with kind eyes and natural hair pulled back. She wore scrubs, and her face showed exhaustion that matched his own. "Oh my God," she said softly, looking at Lily. "How long has she been crying?" "About 2 hours. I'm Scott, and this is Lily. I'm really sorry to bother you, but I didn't know where else to turn. I'm Julie Candy, and you don't need to apologize. Come in." Scott stepped into the warm apartment, immediately noticing how different it felt from his own place. Where his felt cold and empty, Julie's felt lived in and welcoming. Soft blankets draped the couch, plants lined the windowsills, and the air smelled faintly of vanilla and something comforting he couldn't identify. "Let me see her," Julie said, extending her arms toward Lily. Something in her voice, gentleness mixed with authority, made Scott trust her immediately. He transferred Lily carefully, and Julie immediately began swaying gently, making soft shushing sounds. But Lily's cries only intensified, her tiny body rigid with hunger and distress. "When was her last feeding?" Julie asked, her voice professional but warm. "Around midnight. She finished the last of the formula, and I didn't realize we were out until—" Scott trailed off, feeling like the worst father in the world. Julie looked at him for a long moment, then at Lily, whose cries were becoming weaker but more desperate. Something shifted in her expression. "I can help her, but I need you to know that I recently had a baby. 2 months ago. She didn't make it." Scott felt his heart clench. "Julie, I couldn't ask you to—" "You're not asking, I'm offering. She's hungry and I can feed her." Julie moved to the couch and settled into the corner, adjusting her scrub top. Scott looked away, giving her privacy, but he could hear the moment. Lily latched on, the sudden blessed silence that fell over the apartment. "Oh," Julie whispered, and when Scott glanced back, he saw tears streaming down her face. "Oh, sweet baby." Scott sat heavily in the chair across from them, watching as his daughter finally found the comfort she'd been crying for. Julie's face was a mixture of pain and joy, her free hand gently stroking Lily's dark hair. "Thank you," Scott said, his voice breaking. "I don't know how to thank you." Julie looked up at him, and in her eyes, Scott saw a grief that matched his own desperation. "You don't need to thank me. She needed help, and I needed this too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds being Lily's contented suckling and the soft hum of the heating system. Scott found himself studying Julie's face, the gentle way she held his daughter, the tears that continued to fall silently down her cheeks, the careful tenderness in every movement. "She was beautiful," Julie said suddenly. "My baby." "I was going to name her Hope." Scott felt tears prick his own eyes. "I'm so sorry. Her father, my ex-boyfriend Terrence, he pushed me down the stairs during a fight. I was 7 months pregnant." Julie's voice was steady, but Scott could hear the ocean of pain beneath it. "I lost her 2 days later." "Jesus, Julie, I'm so sorry." Julie smiled sadly, looking down at Lily. "When I heard your baby crying tonight, I couldn't ignore it. She sounded so hungry, so desperate, and I have what she needs." Scott watched as Lily's eyes began to flutter closed, her tiny fist relaxing against Julie's chest. For the first time in 3 days, his daughter looked peaceful. "Her mother left," Scott said quietly. 3 days ago, just walked out and left us both. Julie's eyes met his across the small space. Then she's a fool. Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding born of shared abandonment and desperate love for the tiny girl in Julie's arms. Scott felt something ease in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying since he found Veronica's note. When Lily was finished eating, Julie carefully handed her back to Scott. The baby was drowsy and content. Her face relaxed in a way Scott hadn't seen since Veronica left. "She'll probably sleep for a few hours now," Julie said, readjusting her top. "Long enough for you to get to a store in the morning." Scott stood, cradling his sleeping daughter. "I don't know how to repay you for this." Julie walked them to the door, her movements careful and quiet. "You don't owe me anything, but Scott—" She paused, her hand on the doorknob. "If this happens again, if you need help, my door is always open. I work night shifts at the hospital most of the time, so I'm usually awake anyway." Scott looked into her eyes and saw something he hadn't expected to find on this desperate night. Kindness without conditions, help without strings attached. "Thank you, Julie Candy," he said softly, "for saving us both tonight." As Scott carried his sleeping daughter back across the street to their empty apartment, he couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had shifted. Not just because Lily was finally fed and peaceful, but because of the woman who had opened her door to strangers in the middle of the night and given them exactly what they needed. He tucked Lily into her crib and stood watching her sleep, thinking about Julie's tears and the gentle way she'd held his daughter. Somewhere across the street, in a warm apartment filled with plants and kindness, a woman was probably crying for the baby she'd lost, while giving comfort to the one she'd saved. Scott fell asleep that night, with Lily's peaceful breathing as his lullaby and the memory of Julie's gentle hands soothing his daughter's cries. He didn't know it yet, but this desperate night would be the beginning of everything. The start of a love story that would heal them both and give Lily the mother she truly needed. In the morning he would buy formula and diapers and all the things he'd forgotten in his panic. But he would also find himself thinking about the woman across the street, wondering if she was okay, if she was sleeping peacefully or lying awake thinking about the baby she'd lost and the one she'd helped save. And in 2 days, when Lily started fussing again and Scott felt that familiar panic rising, he would find himself looking across the street at that second-floor window, hoping to see that warm light glowing again. Chapter 2. Sleepless Hearts. Scott stared at the formula can, reading the directions for the 4th time. It should have been simple: water, powder, shake. But somehow he'd managed to make it too thick, too thin, too hot, too cold. Everything felt impossible on 2 hours of sleep with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. 24 hours had passed since Julie Candy saved his daughter's life, and Scott couldn't stop thinking about the woman across the street. Not just because of what she'd done, but how she'd done it, without hesitation, without judgment, with a tenderness that spoke of deep understanding about loving a child desperately. Lily had slept peacefully until 6 a.m., long enough for Scott to rush to the nearest convenience store and buy every brand of formula they had. But now, at 2:30 a.m. the following night, she was fussing again, that particular cry that meant she was still hungry even after finishing her bottle. Scott tried everything, bouncing, swaying, singing lullabies in his off-key voice. Nothing worked. Lily's cries grew more insistent, and Scott felt that familiar panic rising in his chest. Was he doing something wrong? Was the formula not agreeing with her? Should he call the pediatrician? Before he could talk himself out of it, Scott wrapped Lily in her blanket and headed across the street. The same warm light glowed in Julie's window, and when he pressed the buzzer, her voice came through immediately. "Scott? Yeah, it's me. I'm sorry, I know it's late again, but she won't settle, and I think she's still hungry." The buzzer cut him off. Julie opened the door before he could knock, already reaching for the baby. Tonight, she wore pajama pants and an oversized t-shirt, her hair loose around her shoulders, and Scott realized she was beautiful in a way that had nothing to do with makeup or fancy clothes. "Hello, sweet girl," Julie murmured to Lily as she took her. "What's wrong? Did Daddy try his best, but you're still not happy?" As if she understood, Lily's cries immediately began to quiet in Julie's arms. "I feel like such a failure," Scott said, slumping against the doorframe. "I can't even figure out how to feed my own daughter properly." "You're not a failure," Julie said firmly, settling onto the couch with Lily. "You're learning. 3 days ago, your wife walked out on you and your 4-month-old baby. You've been doing this completely alone, with no preparation, no help, no break. The fact that you're here, trying everything you can think of to take care of her, proves you're succeeding." As Lily latched on and began nursing contentedly, Scott felt tension leave his shoulders. "How do you make it look so easy?" "It's not easy," Julie said quietly. "It's instinct and practice. I've been around babies my whole career." "Tell me about your job," Scott said, settling across from her. "What's it like being a pediatric nurse?" Julie's face lit up. "I love it. There's something about helping children, being there during scary moments and making them feel safe. Kids are so resilient, so brave. They trust you completely if you show them kindness. Is that why you became a nurse? My grandmother raised me after my parents died, and she was always helping people in our neighborhood. She taught me that taking care of people is one of the most important things you can do." Scott found himself genuinely curious about this woman who had opened her door to strangers twice now. "What happened to your parents?" "Car accident when I was 8. Drunk driver ran a red light." Julie's voice was matter-of-fact, but Scott could hear the old pain beneath it. "My grandmother was the only family I had left, so I moved to Chicago to live with her. That must have been hard." It was, but my grandmother was incredible. She worked as a home health aide, taking care of elderly people, and sometimes she'd bring me with her. I learned how to be gentle with people who were hurting, how to listen, how to make someone feel cared for, even when everything else in their world was falling apart. Scott watched Julie's face as she spoke, seeing the love and respect she had for the woman who raised her. "Is she still alive?" "Yes, but she has dementia now. She's in a nursing home in Chicago, and most days she doesn't remember who I am." Julie's voice cracked slightly. "But on her good days, she tells me she's proud of the woman I became." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, both lost in their own thoughts. Scott found himself studying Julie's apartment more carefully. The framed photos of an elderly black woman on the side table, the medical textbooks mixed in with romance novels on the bookshelf, the small, succulent plants lined up on the windowsill. "What about you?" Julie asked eventually. "What do you do when you're not trying to figure out formula ratios?" "I run a consulting business, help companies streamline their operations, improve efficiency. It's not as exciting as saving lives, but it pays well, and I get to solve problems, which I've always enjoyed." "Did you always want to be a father?" Scott considered the question. "I thought I did. Veronica and I talked about having kids from the time we got engaged. We had it all planned out, the nursery, the college funds, family vacations. But I don't think either of us really understood what it would actually be like." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we planned for the easy parts, the first steps, teaching her to ride a bike, helping with homework. We didn't plan for the 3 a.m. crying fits, or how exhausted we'd be, or how much our relationship would change." Scott ran his hands through his hair. "I think Veronica expected it to be like playing house with a really realistic doll." Julie shifted Lily to her shoulder and began gently patting her back. "What was your marriage like before, Lily?" "Good," I thought. "We both worked a lot, but we had similar goals. Nice apartment, nice vacations, nice life. But looking back, I wonder if we were just comfortable together rather than actually in love." "What's the difference?" Scott thought about it. Comfortable is easy. You don't fight much because you don't care enough to fight. You go through the motions of being a couple without really connecting. Love is... He paused, searching for the words. Love is caring so much about someone that their pain becomes your pain. Love is wanting to know everything about them, wanting to make their life better just because they exist. Julie was quiet for a moment. It sounds like you know the difference. I'm starting to. After Lily finished eating, Julie handed her back to Scott, but instead of preparing to leave, he found himself reluctant to end the conversation. Would you like some coffee? Julie asked, as if reading his mind. I was going to make some anyway. I don't usually sleep well after working a 12-hour shift. I'd love some coffee, Scott said gratefully. Julie moved to the small kitchen while Scott settled Lily in his arms. The baby was drowsy but awake, making soft cooing sounds as she looked around the unfamiliar apartment. She's beautiful, Julie said, returning with 2 steaming mugs. She has your eyes. Everyone says that, but I don't see it. She does. The same dark brown, and she gets that little crease between her eyebrows when she's thinking, just like you do. Scott looked down at his daughter, trying to see himself in her features. Sometimes I look at her and can't believe she's mine, that I helped create this perfect little person. Do you think Veronica will come back? The question hung in the air between them. Scott had been trying not to think about it, but late at night when the apartment was quiet, he found himself wondering the same thing. I don't know, he said finally. Part of me hopes she will for Lily's sake. Every child deserves to have their mother in their life. But I don't know if I can forgive her for leaving. Not just leaving me, but leaving Lily. Whatever problems we had as a couple, Lily didn't ask for any of this. Julie curled up in the corner of the couch, her coffee mug cradled in both hands. Can I tell you something? Of course. When I lost hope, Terence said maybe it was for the best. He said we weren't ready to be parents anyway, that losing the baby saved us from making a mistake. Julie's voice was steady, but Scott could see the pain in her eyes. That's when I knew I had to leave him, because anyone who could look at the loss of our child as a blessing wasn't someone I could build a life with. I'm so sorry, Julie. My point is, sometimes people show you who they really are in crisis. Veronica showed you that when things get hard, she runs. You showed me that when things get impossible, you keep trying. Scott felt something warm spread through his chest at her words. You showed me that there are still people in the world who help strangers without expecting anything in return. As they talked until 4 a.m., sharing stories about their childhoods, dreams and fears, something shifted between them. Julie told him about deciding to become a nurse, about her first patient, about how good it felt to ease someone's suffering. Scott told her about building his business from nothing, about the satisfaction of solving complex problems, about how lonely success could be when you had no one to share it with. By the time Scott carried sleeping Lily back to his apartment, what had started as desperate necessity was becoming something else, friendship maybe, or the beginning of something deeper. Julie, Scott said as they stood at her door, Lily peaceful in his arms. Would it be okay if I gave you my number? Just in case. I mean, if you don't mind being my emergency contact for baby questions. Julie smiled, and it was the first real smile he'd seen from her. I'd like that. And Scott, you can call me any time, day or night, I mean it. As Scott walked back across the street, he found himself thinking about Julie's smile, about the way she'd looked holding his daughter, about the easy conversation they'd shared over coffee at 3 a.m. For the first time since Veronica left, he felt like maybe he wasn't completely alone in this. In her apartment, Julie cleaned up the coffee mugs and prepared for bed, but she found herself thinking about the man across the street who was learning to be a father under the worst possible circumstances. There was something about Scott's gentle determination, his obvious love for his daughter, that made her want to help him succeed. She programmed his number into her phone and sent him a quick text. "Sweet dreams to both of you. Call me if you need anything." His response came almost immediately. "Thank you for everything. Sleep well." Julie fell asleep that night thinking about the way Scott's face had lit up when Lily smiled at him, about the pain in his voice when he talked about his failed marriage, about the trust he'd shown by bringing his most precious thing to a near stranger for help. What had started as one desperate night was becoming something neither of them had expected. For Julie, it was the first time since losing hope that she felt useful, needed, like she had something to offer the world besides her professional skills. For Scott, it was the first time since Veronica left that he felt like he might actually figure out how to be the father Lily deserved. Neither of them realized it yet, but they were both beginning to heal, and that healing was starting to look a lot like love. Chapter 3. Small Moments, Big Changes. 2 weeks had passed since that first desperate night, and Julie's presence in Scott's life had become essential. What started as emergency midnight visits had evolved into something Scott anticipated daily. Julie stopping by after her shifts, sometimes in scrubs, sometimes in jeans and soft sweaters that made Scott's apartment feel warmer. It was Thursday afternoon when Julie knocked on his door, arriving early with groceries, and the patient smile Scott recognized as her teaching mode. "Time for baby care 101, she announced, setting the groceries on his kitchen counter. "I have the day off, and I think it's time you learned some tricks that'll make your life easier." Scott looked up from where he'd been unsuccessfully trying to calm a fussy Lily for the past 20 minutes. "Please tell me you have magic baby whispering powers." "Better than magic," Julie said, taking Lily from his arms with practiced ease. "I have experience and patience. 2 things you're going to develop too." Within moments of being in Julie's arms, Lily's cries subsided to soft whimpers, then stopped. Scott watched in amazement as Julie began a gentle swaying motion, humming quietly while studying Lily's face. "See this?" Julie pointed to Lily's clenched fists. "She's overstimulated. And look how she's turning away from the light. She needs to calm down before she can tell us what she actually needs." "How do you know all that?" "Babies have a language. Once you learn to read it, everything becomes clearer." As Julie continued her gentle swaying in the softer light, Scott watched Lily's features gradually relax. Her fists unclenched, her breathing became more even, and suddenly she was looking around with alert, curious eyes instead of the frustrated expression she'd worn all afternoon. "Now," Julie said softly, "let's see what she's actually trying to tell us." Julie went through a methodical process, checking Lily's diaper, offering a bottle, testing whether she was too warm or too cold. When Lily refused the bottle but started making sucking motions with her mouth, Julie nodded with satisfaction. She's working on her pacifier skills, but she's not actually hungry. She wants to suck for comfort, not nutrition. This is when a pacifier would help, but if you don't have one handy, Julie gently offered Lily her clean pinky finger, which the baby immediately began sucking contentedly. She just needed something to soothe herself, Scott said, understanding dawning. Exactly. Babies have different kinds of crying for different needs. Hunger sounds different from tiredness, which sounds different from overstimulation or discomfort. Once you learn the difference, you stop feeling like you're constantly guessing. Over the next hour, Julie taught Scott how to properly swaddle Lily. Not too tight, not too loose, arms snug, but hips free to move. She showed him how to read the subtle signs that meant Lily was getting sleepy before she became overtired and difficult to settle. "See how she's starting to stare off into space?" Julie pointed out, as Lily gazed unfocused at the ceiling. "And How she's making those little jerky movements with her arms. That's your 5-minute warning that she needs to go down for a nap. I never noticed that before. That's because you've been in survival mode, Julie said kindly. When you're exhausted and stressed, it's hard to pick up on subtle cues. But now that you're getting a little more sleep, you can start learning her patterns. Scott practiced the swaddling technique, while Julie guided his hands, showing him how to create the snug cocoon that made Lily feel secure. When he finally managed to do it correctly and Lily settled immediately into peaceful sleep, Scott felt a surge of pride that was probably disproportionate to the accomplishment. "I did it," he said, grinning at Julie. "I actually did something right." "You've been doing lots of things right," Julie assured him. "You just haven't given yourself credit for it." As Lily napped in her crib, Scott and Julie settled on the couch, with coffee, falling into the easy conversation that had become the highlight of Scott's days. Today, Julie seemed more relaxed than usual, curled up in the corner of his couch with her legs tucked under her, looking like she belonged there. "Can I ask you something personal?" Scott said. "You've seen me at 3 a.m. in my pajamas feeding your baby? I think we're past formal boundaries. What were you like before? Before Terence? Before you lost hope? What was Julie Candy like when she was happy?" Julie considered this. "I was lighter, I guess. I laughed more easily. I was always planning. Things, trips I wanted to take, classes I wanted to audit, recipes I wanted to try. What happened to that list? Terence happened. He had opinions about how I spent my free time. He thought my dreams were unrealistic and that I should focus on practical things." Scott felt familiar anger rise in his chest at the mention of Terence. What were his goals? Getting promoted at the construction company where he worked, buying a house, having kids who would respect him the way he felt he deserved. Julie's voice grew sad. "I think that's why he was so angry when I got pregnant. He wanted children, but he wanted them to be extensions of him, not actual people with their own needs and personalities. Is that why he was so cruel about losing hope? Partly. But I think mostly he was relieved because it meant he didn't have to share my attention." Julie's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "The night I lost her, when the doctors told us she was gone, he said maybe it was a sign that we weren't meant to be parents, that we should focus on us instead." Scott reached over and took her hand without thinking. "I'm sorry. That's unforgivable." "What about you?" Julie asked, clearly wanting to change the subject. What was Scott Drew like when he was happy? Scott thought about it. Ambitious, maybe to a fault. I had this 5-year plan, then a 10-year plan. Everything mapped out. Career milestones, financial goals, when I'd get married, when I'd have kids. I thought if I could just check all the boxes in the right order, I'd automatically be happy. Did it work? For a while, I thought it did. I built my business, made good money, bought the apartment, married the right kind of woman from the right kind of family. But looking back, I think I was just comfortable. I wasn't really happy. I was just successfully executing a plan. When did you realize that? The night Veronica left. I found her note and my first thought wasn't, how could she leave me? It was, how could she leave Lily? That's when I realized that somewhere along the way, I'd stopped thinking of our marriage as a love story and started thinking of it as a business partnership that wasn't working out. Julie squeezed his hand. But you loved Lily immediately. The moment I saw her, Scott confirmed. Even when she was screaming, and I had no idea what I was doing, even when I felt like I was failing her constantly, I loved her completely. It was the first time in my adult life that I felt something that had nothing to do with plans or goals or what I thought I was supposed to want. That's how I felt about hope, Julie said softly. The moment I found out I was pregnant. Before, I even told Terence I loved her. I would talk to her when I was alone, tell her about all the things we were going to do together. They sat in comfortable silence, both lost in thoughts of the children who had changed their lives, one who was sleeping peacefully in the next room, one who existed only in memory and dreams. "Julie," Scott said eventually, "what do you want? Now, if you could plan a new life, what would it look like?" Julie was quiet for so long that Scott wondered if he'd asked too personal a question. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful and careful. "I want to feel useful again, not just professionally, but personally. I want to take care of people who appreciate being taken care of. I want to laugh more, worry less. I want to feel like I'm building something instead of just surviving." "What kind of something?" "A family, maybe. A real one, built on choice instead of obligation. People who choose to love each other every day, not because they have to, but because they want to." Scott felt something warm spread through his chest at her words. "That sounds perfect. What about you? What do you want?" Scott looked toward the nursery where Lily was sleeping, then back at Julie, who was watching him with those kind, patient eyes that had become so important to him. "I want to be the kind of father Lily deserves. I want to learn how to read her cues like you do, how to make her feel safe and loved always. And I want—" He paused, suddenly shy about voicing what he was thinking. "I want someone to build that family with, someone who loves Lily like I do, who wants to create something beautiful and real." Their eyes met and held, and Scott felt the air in the room shift with unspoken possibilities. The moment was interrupted by Scott's phone buzzing with a text message. He glanced at it, and his expression darkened. "What is it?" Julie asked. "My brother James. He says my mother wants to meet the woman who's been helping with Lily." Scott set the phone aside with a grimace. "I've been putting off telling my family about you because I knew they'd have opinions." "What kind of opinions?" "The kind based on assumptions about your motivations rather than actually knowing you," Scott said carefully. Julie understood immediately. "Because I'm black." "Because you're not from their world," Scott corrected, then sighed. "Okay, yes, probably because you're black too. My family isn't openly racist, but they have very specific ideas about who belongs in their social circle." "You want me to meet them?" Scott turned to face her fully. "I want them to see what I see when I look at you. I want them to understand that you're not some random woman I'm paying to babysit. You're the person who saved my life and my daughter's life, who's teaching me how to be a better father, who makes this apartment feel like a home." But, I'm afraid they'll be awful to you, and you don't deserve that." Julie considered this for a moment. "Scott, I've dealt with people's assumptions my whole life. I can handle your family. The question is whether you're ready to defend what we're building here if they disapprove." "What are we building here?" Scott asked quietly. Julie looked around the apartment, at the baby monitors and bottles, at the way they'd unconsciously arranged themselves on the couch like they belonged together, at the comfortable domesticity that had developed between them over the past 2 weeks. "Something real," she said finally. "Something worth defending." That evening, after Julie had gone home and Lily was settled for the night, Scott found himself grocery shopping with a specific purpose for the first time since Veronica left. He bought the herbal tea Julie mentioned loving, the whole grain bread she preferred, fresh ingredients for the soup she made when she thought he looked tired. As he arranged the items in his kitchen, Scott realized that somewhere between learning to read Lily's cues and sharing coffee at dawn with Julie, he'd stopped thinking about surviving each day and started thinking about building a life. And for the first time since his carefully planned world fell apart, that life looked exactly like something he wanted. Chapter 4. The Truth Unfolds. Scott was folding laundry while Lily played in her bouncy seat when his phone rang. His college friend David hadn't called in months, and Scott almost let it go to voicemail. "Scott, man, I saw something on social media about Veronica that I thought you should know." Scott's hand stilled on the tiny onesie. What about her? She's been posting constantly about her new life and finding herself. Party photos, vacation pictures, quotes about leaving toxic situations. I wouldn't have thought much of it, but she's been posting since October, right after she left you and Lily. Scott sank into his chair, still holding Lily's clothes. What kind of posts? Hold on, let me read you some of these captions. Here's one from 2 weeks ago. 6 months of freedom, and finally learning what it means to put myself first. Sometimes, the hardest decision is the right decision. And this one from last week, living my best life surrounded by people who support my journey, no more walking on eggshells or pretending to be someone I'm not. Scott felt something cold settle in his stomach. She's been posting this stuff for months, since October 8th. The first post is a selfie at some beach resort with the caption, "New chapter begins now, finally free from negativity and ready to focus on my own happiness." October 8th, Scott. Repeated numbly, "That's 2 days after she left us. Scott, I'm really sorry, man. I just thought you should know. Especially because she's been getting a lot of supportive comments from people who don't know the full story." After David hung up, Scott opened Instagram and searched for Veronica's profile. What he found made his blood run cold. Photo after photo of Veronica living it up. Poolside drinks, expensive dinners, shopping trips, spa days, all posted while he'd struggled alone with a newborn, all with captions about self-care and leaving toxic relationships. The comments were worse. Dozens of people congratulating her on her brave decision, telling her she deserved happiness. Friends from their social circle that Scott hadn't heard from since she left, all supporting Veronica's narrative of escaping something bad. Scott's hands were shaking as he scrolled through months of posts. Here was Halloween. Veronica as a fairy, surrounded by friends, captioned, "First Halloween in years, where I get to be exactly who I want to be." On that same night, Scott had been home alone with sick Lily. Here was Thanksgiving, a beautifully set restaurant table captioned, "Grateful for new beginnings and the courage to walk away from what wasn't serving me." Scott had spent Thanksgiving microwaving frozen dinners because he hadn't figured out how to cook while managing an infant. The most recent post was from 3 days ago, Veronica getting a pedicure, captioned, "Self-Care Sunday, Learning to Love Myself First, after years of giving everything to someone who didn't appreciate it." Scott set his phone down with shaking hands and looked at Lily, who was babbling happily at her toy elephant. While their daughter had been learning to smile, learning to roll over, fighting through her first illness, Veronica had been rewriting their entire marriage as a story of her liberation from some kind of prison. The worst part wasn't even the posts themselves. It was the realization that Veronica had been planning this narrative from the beginning, the way she'd framed her departure as heroic self-preservation rather than abandonment, the way she'd positioned herself as the victim, while Scott had been desperately trying to figure out how to be a single parent. When Julie arrived that evening, she found Scott sitting on his couch staring blankly at the wall while Lily fussed. In her bouncy seat. "Hey," Julie said softly, immediately picking up Lily and soothing her with practiced ease. "Rough day?" Scott showed her his phone, pulling up Veronica's Instagram feed. Julie's expression grew darker with each post she scrolled through. "Oh, Scott," she said finally, "this is awful." 6 months, Scott said, his voice hollow. "For 6 months she's been telling the world that leaving us was the best decision she ever made, that I was some kind of toxic husband she had to escape from." Julie settled beside him on the couch with Lily in her arms. "You know that's not true, right? Anyone who's seen you with Lily knows what kind of man you are." "But that's just it. Most people haven't seen me with Lily. Our old friends, our social circle, they're all seeing Veronica's version of events. She's controlling the narrative, making herself look like the brave woman who escaped, and me look like I don't even know what." Julie was quiet for a moment, gently bouncing Lily. Scott, there's something I need to tell you too. About Terence. Scott looked at her, seeing pain in her eyes that he recognized. I ran into Sarah Mitchell at the grocery store yesterday. She used to work with me at the hospital before transferring to the ER. She said she'd heard about what happened with Terence and me, and she wanted me to know that he's been... Julie's voice caught. He's been telling people his version of what happened. What do you mean? According to Sarah, Terence has been telling anyone who will listen that I was mentally unstable during our relationship, that I was obsessed with having a baby and became dangerous when things didn't go my way. He's saying that I lost hope because I was too emotionally unstable to carry a pregnancy to term. Scott felt rage building in his chest. He's blaming you for losing your baby. It gets worse, Julie said, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah said he told people that I made up the domestic violence allegations because I couldn't handle him breaking up with me, that I was too crazy to be a mother anyway, and losing the baby was probably for the best. Jesus Christ, Julie. He's been saying this for months, Scott. While I've been going to grief counseling and trying to heal, he's been destroying my reputation and making people think I'm some kind of unstable woman who makes up stories for attention. Scott set his phone aside and turned to face Julie fully. Do people believe him? Some do. Sarah said, a few of our former colleagues have been asking questions about my mental health, whether I should be working with children if I'm that unstable. My supervisor hasn't said anything to me directly, but I've noticed I'm not getting assigned to the cases I used to get. They sat in stunned silence for a moment, both processing the realization that their exes hadn't just abandoned them. They'd actively worked to destroy their reputations and justify their own cruel behavior. They're doing the same thing, Scott said finally. Veronica and Terence, they're both rewriting history to make themselves look like victims and us look like the problems. It's more than that, Julie said, her voice growing stronger with anger. They're not just protecting themselves, they're trying to make sure we can't recover. Veronica's posts aren't just about her new life. They're about painting you as someone she had to escape from. Terence isn't just moving on, he's actively trying to make people think I'm dangerous to be around. Scott felt something click into place. They want us to be alone. They want us to feel like we deserved what happened to us. And they want to make sure no one else sees us as worth loving, Julie added. If people think you're toxic and I'm crazy, then we're both isolated, both damaged goods that no one else would want. But that's not who we are, Scott said fiercely. Julie, look at what we've built together. Look at how happy Lily is, how well we work as a team, how much we've helped each other heal. Julie looked down at Lily, who had fallen asleep in her arms, her face peaceful and content. You're right, but Scott, we need to be prepared for the fact that their lies might catch up with us. If Veronica ever decides she wants Lily back, she's been building a case for months that you were an unfit husband. And if anyone in my professional circle believes what Terence has been saying, then we fight back, Scott said without hesitation. We tell the truth. We document everything. How well Lily is doing, what kind of parents we are together, the lies they've been spreading. What if no one believes us? What if their stories are already too established? Scott reached over and took Julie's free hand. Then we prove them wrong by living well, by being the family we know we can be, by showing everyone that what we have is real and good and worth fighting for. Julie squeezed his hand. I'm scared, Scott. What if Veronica comes back and uses her post to make it look like you drove her away? What if people at the hospital start questioning my fitness to work with children? Then we'll deal with it together, Scott said firmly. Julie, I don't care what lies they've told or what narratives they've created. I know who you are. Lily knows who you are. And if other people can't see it, that's their loss. How can you be so sure? Scott looked at this woman who had saved his daughter's life, who had taught him how to be a father, who had turned his empty apartment into a home. Because I see you every day. I see how gentle you are with Lily, how patient you are with me when I'm learning something new, how you put our needs before your own without even thinking about it. I see someone who chooses love over and over again, even after being hurt. Julie felt tears spring to her eyes. I see the same thing in you. When I watch you with Lily, when I see how hard you try to be the father she deserves, when you defend me against people who don't even know me, I see someone worth fighting for. Then that's what we do, Scott said. We fight for this. For us, for Lily, for the family we're building, and we don't let their lies define us. That night, after Julie had gone home and Lily was sleeping peacefully, Scott made a decision. He screenshotted every one of Veronica's posts, documenting the timeline of her liberation narrative. If she ever tried to come back and claim she'd left for legitimate reasons, he would have proof that she'd been celebrating her departure from day one. Across the street, Julie was doing the same thing, calling Sarah back to get exact quotes of what Terence had been saying, documenting the timeline of his lies, preparing to defend herself against accusations she'd hoped she'd never have to face. Both of them were angry, hurt and scared, but they were also determined. Their exes had tried to destroy them, but instead of breaking them down, the cruelty had shown them what they were fighting for. They were fighting for the quiet mornings when Lily smiled. At both of them, they were fighting for the easy conversations over coffee at dawn. They were fighting for the way they'd learned to work together, to trust each other, to build something beautiful out of the wreckage of their previous lives. And as angry as they were at Veronica and Terence, there was something else growing alongside the rage. Gratitude. Gratitude that they'd been abandoned by people who didn't deserve them, because that abandonment had led them to each other. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that could have happened. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what you actually need, and what Scott and Julie needed was each other. Chapter 5. Falling Without Fear. The call came at 11:30 p.m., just as Scott was drifting off to sleep. Lily had been fussy all evening, refusing her bottle and crying whenever he tried to put her down. When he checked her temperature, the thermometer read 101.8 degrees. Scott's hands shook as he dialed Julie's number, panic rising in his chest. "Julie? I'm sorry to call so late, but Lily has a fever and she won't eat, and I don't know what to do." "I'm coming over," Julie said immediately, already moving around her apartment. "How high is the fever?" "I'm 101.8. She's been crying for hours, and she feels so hot. Give her some infant Tylenol if you have it, and try to keep her comfortable. I'll be there in 5 minutes. Julie arrived in pajamas with a medical bag and focused concern that immediately made Scott feel less alone. "Let me see her," she said, taking Lily gently. The baby was listless and warm, her usual bright alertness replaced by the glazed look of illness. Julie went through a systematic assessment, checking Lily's breathing, looking in her ears, feeling her neck for swollen glands. "Has she been eating today?" "Not much. About half her bottles, and she seemed more tired than usual. It's probably just a virus. Her breathing sounds clear, and her ears look fine. But we need to monitor her temperature and make sure she stays hydrated." "Should we take her to the emergency room?" "Not yet. Let's see how she responds to the Tylenol. If her fever goes above 102, or if she shows any signs of difficulty breathing, then we'll go. But right now, she just needs comfort and careful monitoring." Over the next few hours, Julie transformed into the professional nurse Scott had heard about, but never fully witnessed. She took Lily's temperature every 30 minutes, monitored her breathing, encouraged tiny sips of water. She showed Scott how to use a cool washcloth to bring down the fever. "You're incredible," Scott said around 2 a.m., watching Julie gently. "Coax Lily to drink from a small dropper." I would have been at the emergency room hours ago, completely panicking. You would have figured it out. But this is what I do. I'm so grateful you're here. I don't know what I would have done without you." Julie looked up at him, and something passed between them in the dim light of the living room lamp. "You don't have to do this alone anymore, Scott. You know that, right?" By 4 a.m., Lily's fever had broken. She was sleeping peacefully in Julie's arms, her breathing even, and her skin no longer burning with heat. The first light of dawn was beginning to filter through the windows, and both adults were exhausted but relieved. "She's going to be okay," Julie whispered, gently transferring the sleeping baby to her crib. When she returned to the living room, Scott was slumped on the couch, his head in his hands. The adrenaline of the night was wearing off, leaving him shaky with relief and exhaustion. "Hey," Julie said softly, sitting beside him. "She's fine. You did everything right." "I was so scared," Scott admitted. "When I saw that fever, when she wouldn't stop crying, all I could think was that I was going to lose her too." Julie reached over and took his hand without thinking. "You're not going to lose her. She's healthy and strong, and she has a father who loves her enough to call for help when he needs it." They sat in comfortable silence as the room gradually lightened with the approaching sunrise. Scott found himself studying their joined hands, amazed by how natural it felt to be touching Julie this way, how right it seemed. "Julie," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something." "What?" "These past few weeks, having you in our lives, it's been the best thing that's happened to me since Lily was born. Maybe the best thing that's happened to me, period." Julie's breath caught. "Scott, I know this is complicated. I know we both have baggage, and we're both still healing from what our exes did to us. But I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just gratitude." Julie turned to face him fully, her heart pounding. "What do you feel?" Scott looked into her eyes, seeing kindness and intelligence and a beauty that had nothing to do with her features and everything to do with who she was as a person. "I feel like I'm falling in love with you," he said simply. "And it terrifies me, but it also feels like the most natural thing in the world." Julie felt tears spring to her eyes. "Scott, You don't have to say anything," Scott said quickly. "I just needed you to know. I needed to be honest about what's happening here. No, I do need to say something," Julie said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because I'm falling in love with you too." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and fear. Scott searched Julie's face, seeing the same mixture of hope and terror that he felt in his own chest. "What do we do now?" he asked. Instead of answering with words, Julie leaned toward him slowly, giving him time to pull away if he wanted to. But Scott didn't pull away. He met her halfway, and when their lips touched, it felt like everything in the world suddenly made sense. The kiss was soft and tentative at first, both of them afraid of this new territory they were entering. But as Julie's hand found the back of Scott's neck and he pulled her closer, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of months of suppressed longing and the promise of a future neither of them had dared to imagine. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Wow," Julie whispered. "Yeah," Scott agreed, resting his forehead against hers. "Wow." But then suddenly, Julie pulled back, her expression changing to one of fear. "We can't do this," she said, standing up abruptly and moving away from the couch. "Julie, what's wrong? This is wrong. We can't do this to Lily." Scott stood and moved toward her, confused. "Do what to Lily? Get involved romantically when she's already attached to me. What happens when this doesn't work out? What happens when you realize that you're just grateful to me for helping, not actually in love with me? What happens when I mess this up the way I mess everything up?" "Julie, you don't mess everything up." "Yes, I do." Julie's voice was rising, and she immediately lowered it, conscious of Lily sleeping in the next room. "I drove Terence away by wanting too much, by being too needy, by trying to turn our relationship into something it wasn't. What if I do the same thing with you?" Scott felt his heart breaking at the pain in her voice. "Julie, what you had with Terence wasn't real. He was an abuser who convinced you that his cruelty was your fault. But what if he was right about me? What if I am too much, too clingy, too desperate for a family?" "Stop," Scott said firmly, moving to stand in front of her. "Julie, look at me." Reluctantly, she met his eyes. "You are not too much. You are not clingy or desperate. You're kind and generous and loving, and any man who can't see that is an idiot." "But Scott, what if we try this, and it ruins everything? What if we destroy what we have for something that might not even be real?" Scott took her hands gently. "What we have right now, this friendship, this partnership in taking care of Lily, that's real. And what I feel for you goes way beyond gratitude. I'm not falling in love with you because you've helped me. I'm falling in love with you because of who you are." "How can you be sure?" "Because I love the way you sing to Lily when you think no one is listening. I love how you scrunch your nose when you're concentrating on something difficult. I love that you bring me soup when I look tired, and that you've memorized exactly how I like my coffee. I love that you're brave enough to open your door to strangers at 3 a.m. and gentle enough to soothe a sick baby for hours without complaint." Julie felt fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'm scared, Scott. I'm so scared of getting my heart broken again." "I'm terrified too," Scott admitted. "I'm terrified that you'll realize I'm not worth loving, that I'm just some guy who can't even take care of his own daughter without help. I'm terrified that you'll leave the way Veronica did, that I'll wake up one day and you'll decide this is too hard. I would never do that. And I would never hurt you the way Terence did. Julie, we're both scared because we've both been hurt. But what we have together, it's nothing like what we had with them." Julie looked at this good, gentle man who had trusted her with his most precious thing, who had defended her against his own family's prejudices, who looked at her like she was something wonderful instead of something broken. "What are you saying?" she asked softly. "I'm saying that yes, this is scary, yes, we could get hurt, but Julie, you and Lily are the only good things in my life right now. I'm not willing to let fear stop me from trying to build something beautiful with you." "What if we take it slow?" Julie asked hesitantly. "What if we admit that we're falling in love, but we don't rush into anything? Give ourselves time to be sure." "I think that's the smartest thing either of us has said all night," Scott said with a small smile. "So, we're doing this? We're really going to try?" Scott reached up and gently brushed a tear from her cheek. "We're already doing it, Julie. We've been building a relationship for weeks. Now we're just being honest about what it is." Julie leaned into his touch, feeling some of the fear ease out of her chest. "I do love you, Scott, and I love Lily like she's my own daughter." "She is your daughter," Scott said firmly. "In every way that matters, you're her mother." As the sun fully rose and filled the apartment with warm morning light, Scott and Julie held each other on the couch, both scared and hopeful and deeply in love. In the nursery, Lily slept peacefully, completely unaware that her family had just officially become complete. They had a long way to go, conversations to have, fears to work through, a future to plan carefully. But they also had something precious, love that had grown out of genuine caring, trust that had been earned through months of showing up for each other, and a shared commitment to the little girl who had brought them together. It wasn't the way either of them had planned to find love. But sometimes the best things come when you're not looking for them. When you're just trying to survive and someone shows up to help you not just survive, but thrive. And that's exactly what they intended to do. Together. Chapter 6. Building. Something real. 3 weeks after their first kiss, Scott and Julie had settled into a rhythm that felt natural. Julie's toothbrush sat beside Scott's. Her favorite tea filled a shelf in his kitchen, and her nursing textbooks were stacked beside his business magazines. She hadn't officially moved in, but the boundaries had blurred until the distinction felt meaningless. It was a Saturday morning in late November when Scott woke to find Julie already up, sitting in the rocking chair with Lily, both bathed in soft light filtering through the curtains. Julie hummed quietly while Lily gazed up at her with complete trust. "Good morning, beautiful girls," Scott said softly from the doorway. Julie looked up with a smile that still made his heart skip a beat. "Someone was up early and decided she wanted to watch the sunrise with Mama." The word slipped out naturally, as it had been doing more and more often. Lily had started reaching for Julie whenever she was upset, calling out "Mama, Ma" in her baby babble when Julie left the room. It was clear who she considered her mother, regardless of biology. "What do my girls want to do today?" Scott asked, coming to kiss Julie's forehead and stroke Lily's soft cheek. "Actually," Julie said, her eyes lighting up with excitement, "I had an idea. The weather is supposed to be beautiful today. Maybe our last warm day before winter, really. What if we pack a picnic and take Lily to the park? She's never really been on an outdoor adventure." Scott loved seeing Julie like this, animated and planning, thinking about experiences they could share as a family. It was so different from the careful, guarded woman who had first opened her door to him that desperate night. An hour later, they were spreading a blanket under a large oak tree in Central Park, Lily lying between them on her back, staring up at the dancing leaves with wide-eyed wonder. Julie had packed sandwiches and fresh fruit, and Scott had brought coffee in a thermos and his camera to capture Lily's first real picnic. "Look at her face," Julie laughed, pointing to Lily's expression of complete amazement as a squirrel ran across the grass nearby. "She's like a little scientist, trying to figure out this whole new world." Scott snapped a photo of both of them, Julie pointing excitedly at the squirrel, while Lily tracked its movement with serious concentration. In the picture, they looked like what they were, a mother sharing her child's first discoveries. "Julie," Scott said, setting down his camera, "can I ask you something?" "Of course. Do you ever think about having more children? I mean, after everything that happened with Hope." Julie was quiet for a moment, watching Lily grab at the sunlight filtering through the leaves. "I used to be terrified that I'd never want to risk pregnancy again, that losing Hope had broken something in me permanently. And now I look at Lily and I think about how amazing it would be to give her a sibling. I think about experiencing pregnancy with someone who would be excited about it, who would take care of me instead of making me feel like it was something I was doing to inconvenience them." Scott felt warmth spread through his chest at her words. "I think about that too, about what it would be like to go through pregnancy together, to see you carrying our baby. Is that something you really want? More children? With you?" "Yes. Absolutely." Scott reached over and took her hand. "I want Lily to have siblings. I want to experience all of it with you, the doctor's appointments, the nursery planning, teaching our kids to play together." Julie squeezed his hand. "I love that you say our kids like Lily already counts. She does count. Julie, she's been yours since the night you first fed her. Biology doesn't make someone a parent. Love does." As if hearing her name, Lily rolled onto her side and made grabbing motions toward Julie. Without hesitation, Julie scooped her up and settled her in her lap, continuing their conversation while absent-mindedly entertaining the baby with peekaboo games. "My grandmother used to say that families aren't just about blood," Julie said, making funny faces that had Lily giggling. "She said the best families are the ones where people choose each other every day." "Your grandmother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. I think she would have loved you. She always said I should find a man who was kind to children and old people, because that's how you know someone's true character. How am I doing on the old people front?" Julie laughed. "You bring Mrs. Henderson from downstairs groceries every week without her even asking. I think you'd pass grandmother's test." They spent the afternoon introducing Lily to the wonders of the outdoors, the feel of grass beneath her hands, the sound of birds singing, the way shadows moved across the ground. When Lily got fussy, Julie nursed her right there on the blanket, completely unself-conscious and natural about it. "You're an amazing mother," Scott said, watching Julie soothe their daughter. "So are you an amazing father," Julie replied. "Look how secure she is, how happy. Children who are well-loved have this confidence about them, this trust in the world. Lily has that because of you, because of us," Scott corrected. That evening, after they'd given Lily her bath together and put her down for the night, Scott and Julie settled on the couch with take-out Chinese food and a bottle of wine. These quiet dinners had become sacred time for them, a chance to reconnect as adults after spending the day focused on Lily's needs. "I've been thinking about something," Julie said, curled up against Scott's side with her head on his shoulder. "What's that?" "About us, about how this feels different from any relationship I've ever had." Scott set down his wine glass and turned to look at her. "Different how?" "With Terence, everything felt like work. I was constantly trying to prove that I was worth loving, trying to anticipate his moods, trying to be whatever he wanted me to be. But with you," Julie paused, searching for the right words. "With you, I feel like I can just be myself." "You can always be yourself with me," Scott said, stroking her hair. "I fell in love with exactly who you are." "I know. And that's what's so amazing about this. I'm not performing or pretending or trying to earn your love. I just wake up every morning knowing that you love me and I love you, and we're building something real together." Scott felt a surge of emotion at her words. "It is real, the most real thing I've ever experienced." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft cry from the nursery. Not distressed, just Lily's way of letting them know she was awake and wanted attention. Without discussion, they both got up to check on her, moving together with the easy coordination of parents who had learned to work as a team. They found Lily sitting up in her crib, not upset, but clearly wanting company. Julie picked her up while Scott adjusted the nightlight, and they settled into the rocking chair together, all three of them fitting perfectly in the chair meant for one. "This is what I want forever," Scott said quietly, his arms around both, his girls. "These quiet moments when it's just us." "Me too," Julie whispered. "I used to think I needed grand gestures and dramatic declarations to know that love was real. But this, sitting here with you and Lily, feeling completely content and safe, this is what real love actually looks like." As if agreeing with them, Lily made soft, happy baby sounds and settled more comfortably against Julie's chest. "I think someone approves of our family," Scott said with a smile. "Speaking of our family," Julie said, her voice growing slightly nervous, "I need to tell you something." "What is it?" "I got a call from my supervisor at the hospital today. There's been some gossip about my relationship with you, and she wanted to hear my side of the story." Scott felt tension creep into his shoulders. "What kind of gossip?" "Apparently someone, and I have a pretty good idea who, has been suggesting that I'm in a relationship with a patient's father for financial gain. That I'm taking advantage of a vulnerable single father. That's ridiculous. Anyone who's seen us together knows—" "I know it's ridiculous," Julie interrupted. "And my supervisor knows it too. She just wanted to make sure I was aware of what people were saying so I could address it if necessary." "Are you in trouble at work?" "No. She actually said she's impressed with how professional I've been about the whole situation and that she's seen how much Lily has thrived under my care." "But Scott, if this gossip gets worse, it could become a problem." Scott pulled Julie and Lily closer. "Then we deal with it, together. We document everything. We show them how happy and healthy Lily is. We prove that what we have is real and good." "What if they try to say, I'm unfit to work with children?" "They won't. Because you're the best pediatric nurse they have, and anyone with eyes can see how much you love children." Scott pressed a kiss to the top of her head. Besides, soon you'll have a different last name, and it'll be harder for people to connect you to the gossip. Julie looked up at him. Is that a proposal? Scott's eyes widened as he realized what he'd just implied. I mean, that is, if you want it to be. Julie laughed, and the sound filled the nursery with warmth. Scott Drew, are you proposing to me while we're sitting in a rocking chair with a baby between us? Actually, Scott said, his voice growing more confident, I can't think of a more perfect way to propose. This is us, Julie. This is our family. And yes, I'm asking you to marry me. Julie felt tears spring to her eyes. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I want to marry you. As they kissed over Lily's head, their daughter made happy gurgling sounds, as if she approved of this development too. Later that night, after Lily was settled back in her crib, and they were lying in bed together, Scott and Julie talked about their future, about wedding plans and baby names, and the house they wanted to buy together someday. I love you, Julie Candy, Scott said as they drifted off to sleep. I love you too, Scott Drew. All of you, forever. Outside, snow began to fall gently, covering the world in a blanket of white. Inside, a family slept peacefully, complete and content and ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. They had found each other in the darkness of desperate need, but they had built their love in the light of daily choice, daily care, daily commitment to each other and to the child who had brought them together. And that kind of love, the kind built slowly and carefully and with intention, was strong enough to weather any storm. Chapter 7, The Return. Scott was making coffee while Julie fed Lily breakfast when the knock came. It was 9 a.m. on a Tuesday, too early for visitors. When he looked through the peephole, his blood turned cold. Veronica stood in the hallway, looking, thinner than he remembered, her blonde hair showing dark roots. She wore an expensive coat that had seen better days and shifted nervously from foot to foot. Scott, Julie called from the kitchen, hearing him freeze. Who is it? It's Veronica, he said quietly, shock and anger tightening his voice. Julie appeared in the doorway with Lily in her arms, the baby happily gumming a piece of banana. Your ex-wife, Veronica? The one and only. Scott looked through the peephole again, part of him hoping she would just disappear. What do I do? Open the door, Julie said firmly. Let's see what she wants. Scott stared at her. Are you sure? Scott, she's going to find a way to see Lily eventually. It's better if we control the circumstances. Julie's voice was calm, but Scott could see the tension in her shoulders. Besides, I want to meet the woman who walked away from all this. Scott took a deep breath and opened the door. Veronica looked up at him with eyes that were red-rimmed and desperate. Hello, Scott, she said, her voice smaller than he remembered. Can I come in? What do you want, Veronica? I want to see my daughter. I want to talk about coming home. Scott felt anger surge through him. Coming home? You don't have a home here anymore. Please, Scott, just give me 5 minutes. Against his better judgment, Scott stepped aside. Veronica's eyes immediately went to Julie and Lily, and her face crumpled when she saw her daughter, now 10 months old, contentedly eating breakfast in another woman's arms. She's so big, Veronica whispered. She looks so different. That happens when you abandon a baby for 6 months, Scott said coldly. They grow up. I didn't abandon her. I was sick, Scott. I had postpartum depression, and I didn't know how to handle it. Really? Because your Instagram tells a very different story. Veronica's face flushed. That wasn't... I was trying to convince myself I'd made the right decision, but I was wrong, Scott. I want to come home. I want us to be a family again. We are a family. Just not the one you left. For the first time, Veronica really looked at Julie, taking in the way she held Lily, the casual intimacy of the morning scene, the ring on Julie's left hand. "You're engaged," Veronica said, her voice flat. "Yes? To her? To the babysitter?" "To Julie," Scott corrected. "The woman who's been Lily's mother while you were off finding yourself." Veronica's composure cracked. "She's not Lily's mother. I'm Lily's mother." Julie spoke for the first time since Veronica arrived, her voice gentle but firm. "Being a mother is about more than giving birth, Veronica. It's about showing up every day, learning what she needs, being there when she's sick or scared or hungry. And who are you to tell me about being a mother?" Veronica snapped. "You're just some nurse who what?" Julie interrupted, her voice still calm. "Who fed your starving daughter when you weren't here? Who taught her to eat solid foods? And held her through her first illness? Who gets up with her at night and knows exactly how she likes to be comforted?" Veronica stared at Julie, then at Lily, who was watching the conversation with the serious expression she wore when adults were talking in tense voices. "I want to hold her," Veronica said suddenly. "I want to hold my daughter." Scott started to object, but Julie surprised him by nodding. "Of course, she should know who you are." Julie stood and gently transferred Lily to Veronica's arms. For a moment, nobody breathed. Then Lily took one look at the stranger holding her and began to cry. Not the fussy crying of a tired or hungry baby, but the deep, distressed wails of a child who didn't recognize the person holding her and wanted to get back to safety. "Shh, baby, it's okay," Veronica said desperately, bouncing Lily awkwardly. "It's Mommy, it's your Mommy." But Lily's cries only intensified. She arched her back, pushing away from Veronica, her face red with distress as she reached her arms toward Julie. "She doesn't know me," Veronica said, her own voice breaking. "My own daughter doesn't know me." Julie gently took Lily back, and the baby immediately stopped crying, burying her face in Julie's neck with obvious relief. "Mama," Lily said clearly, patting Julie's cheek. "Mama." The word hung in the air like a physical blow. Veronica staggered backward as if she'd been slapped. "She calls her Mama," Veronica whispered. "She calls another woman Mama." "Because Julie is her Mama," Scott said quietly. "In every way that matters." Veronica sank into the nearest chair, her face in her hands. "I've lost her. I've lost my own daughter." "You lost her the night you walked out," Scott said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. Despite everything, seeing Veronica's pain was hard. "Julie didn't take her from you. You gave her away." "I can fight this," Veronica said suddenly, looking up with desperate determination. "I can get a lawyer. She's my biological daughter. I have rights." "Do you?" Julie asked gently. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you gave up those rights when you abandoned her." "I didn't abandon her," Veronica said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. "I was sick." "Then where are your medical records?" Scott asked. "Where's the proof of this therapy you supposedly got? Where's any evidence that you left for health reasons rather than because you decided you didn't want to be a mother?" Veronica was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on Lily, who was now playing with Julie's necklace and babbling happily. "I made a mistake," she said finally. "I was overwhelmed and scared, and I thought maybe I wasn't cut out for motherhood. But I've realized I was wrong. I want to try again." "It doesn't work that way," Julie said softly. "You can't. Just try again when it comes to a child's attachment and security. Look at her, Veronica. Really look at her. She's happy, healthy, thriving. She knows who her family is." "I could learn," Veronica said desperately. "I could be a good mother if you gave me a chance." "You had a chance," Scott said. "You had the first 4 months of her life and you checked out. You had 6 months to call or write or show any interest in her well-being, and instead you posted pictures of yourself partying." Veronica stood up abruptly. "This isn't over, Scott. She's my daughter, and I'm going to fight for her. Then you'll lose, Julie said calmly, because any judge who looks at the evidence will see what we see, that Lily belongs with the people who've actually been raising her. We'll see about that, Veronica said, heading for the door, but she stopped and turned back, her eyes filled with tears. I did love her, you know. I do love her. Then prove it by walking away, Julie said gently. Prove it by letting her stay with the family who's been taking care of her. After Veronica left, Scott and Julie sat in stunned silence, while Lily played happily on her blanket, completely unaware of the storm that had just blown through her life. I can't believe she thinks she can just waltz back in here and reclaim Lily, Scott said finally. She's desperate, Julie said. Look at her. She's obviously broke, probably alone, and she's seeing what she gave up. But Scott, did you see how Lily reacted to her? She didn't recognize her at all. Her own biological mother was a complete stranger to her. And did you see how immediately she calmed down when I took her back? She knows who her safe people are. She knows who her family is. Scott reached over and took Julie's hand. Are you okay? I know that must have been hard for you, seeing her claim to be Lily's mother. Actually, it wasn't hard at all, Julie said, surprising him. Because watching Lily's reaction made it crystal clear that biology doesn't make someone a parent. Love does. Daily care does. Being there when they need you does. She's going to try to fight us in court, Scott said. She's going to claim parental rights. Let her try, Julie said firmly. We have 6 months of documentation showing Lily's development, her happiness, her attachment to us. We have evidence of Veronica's abandonment and her celebration of leaving. Any reasonable judge will see that taking Lily away from the only family she's ever known would be traumatic for her. Scott pulled Julie closer, and she shifted so they were both watching Lily play. I love you, he said quietly, for being so calm about all this, for protecting Lily, for knowing exactly what she needed. I love you too, and I love her. Julie reached down to stroke Lily's hair. She's ours, Scott, not because a court says so, but because she chose us, and we chose her. That's not going to change. As if she understood, Lily looked up at them and smiled her biggest smile, clapping her hands together with delight. Mama, Dada, she said clearly, reaching for both of them. Scott and Julie looked at each other and laughed, the tension of Veronica's visit beginning to ease. You hear that? Scott said. Mama and Dada. She knows exactly who her parents are. And we're going to make sure she gets to keep them, Julie said firmly. Whatever legal battle lay ahead, they would face it together, because they were a family in every way that mattered, and no one, not even Veronica, could change that. Chapter 8. Fighting for Love. The legal papers arrived 3 days later, delivered by a grim-faced process server. Scott stared at the custody petition with growing disbelief. She's claiming I was emotionally abusive during our marriage, he said, reading to Julie. That she left because she feared for her safety and Lily's safety. She's saying she stayed away because she was afraid I would hurt them if she tried to return. Julie looked up from helping Lily stack blocks. She's rewriting history completely. It gets worse. She's claiming you're an unstable woman who preyed upon a vulnerable single father, and that our relationship creates an inappropriate environment for a child. A power dynamic. Julie's voice rose in disbelief. I was helping a hungry baby. For free. What power dynamic? Scott continued reading, his voice growing tighter with each word. She's requesting full custody of Lily, claiming that my hasty engagement to a near stranger shows poor judgment and creates an unstable environment for a child. A near stranger, Julie repeated flatly. We've been together for 6 months. She knew me for 3 years and still didn't know me well enough to stick around when things got hard, Scott said bitterly. The phone rang, interrupting their outraged reading session. It was Scott's lawyer, David Chen, whom Scott had hired the day. After Veronica's visit, "I've reviewed the petition," David said without preamble. "It's weak legally, but she's got a good lawyer who's playing up the emotional aspects. The abandonment is well documented, but she's claiming it was due to mental health issues and fear for her safety." Can she do that? Just claim mental health issues without proof? She's provided some documentation of therapy sessions from 3 months ago. It's not enough to support her claim that she left for medical reasons, but it might be enough to show a judge that she's trying to address her issues. Scott felt his heart sink. What do? We build our case methodically, document everything: Lily's health records, her developmental milestones, evidence of her attachment to both of you. We gather character witnesses, professional references, anything that shows you've provided excellent care for Lily. What about Veronica's social media posts, the ones showing her partying while we were struggling? Those are helpful, but her lawyer will argue they were part of her coping mechanism. Scott, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. During your marriage, was there ever any incident that Veronica could twist into? Evidence of abuse? Any arguments that got heated any time you raised your voice? Scott thought carefully. We argued, like any couple. But I never raised a hand to her, never threatened her, never did anything that could be construed as abuse. Good. What about Julie's background? Is there anything in her history that Veronica's lawyer could use against her? Scott looked at Julie, who had gone very quiet. Julie lost a baby in a domestic violence situation. Her ex-boyfriend pushed her down the stairs when she was pregnant. That actually works in our favor, David said. It shows she understands the value of protecting children from abusive situations. If anything, it makes her more qualified to recognize and prevent abuse, not less. After they hung up, Scott found Julie standing at the window, holding Lily, and staring out at the street. "Hey," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking about how easy it is for people to twist the truth," Julie said quietly. "Veronica abandons her baby, and somehow that becomes your fault and my fault. I survived domestic violence, and somehow that becomes evidence that I'm unstable." Julie. What if the judge believes her, Scott? What if they decide that a biological mother who claims she was mentally ill is better than an adoptive mother who's actually been raising Lily? Scott turned Julie to face him, careful not to jostle Lily, who was dozing in her arms. "Then we fight harder. We show them the truth. Julie, any reasonable person who looks at the evidence will see what really happened here." But what if they're not reasonable? What if they see a black woman who stole a white woman's family and decide that's the real story? Scott felt anger surge through him at the ugly possibility Julie was voicing. "Then we find a different judge. We appeal. We don't give up." Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Scott opened it to find his mother, Margaret, standing in the hallway with an expression he couldn't read. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I heard about Veronica's lawsuit," she said, stepping into the apartment. "James called me. He heard about it through his lawyer friends." Scott tensed, expecting a lecture about how this wouldn't have happened if he'd married someone more appropriate. Instead, his mother walked directly to Julie and Lily. "May I?" she asked, extending her arms toward her granddaughter. Julie hesitated for a moment, then gently transferred Lily to Margaret's arms. To everyone's surprise, Lily went willingly, babbling happily at her grandmother. "She's beautiful," Margaret said softly, studying Lily's face. "She looks so much like you did at this age, Scott." "Mom, let me finish," Margaret said firmly. "I came here to apologize to both of you. When James first told me about Julie, I made assumptions based on prejudice and fear. I was wrong." Scott stared at his mother in shock. "I've been watching Lily since I arrived," Margaret continued. "She's happy, healthy, clearly well cared for, and deeply loved. When Julie handed her to me, Lily wasn't afraid because she's secure. In her attachments. That doesn't happen by accident. Margaret looked directly at Julie. You've done an extraordinary job raising this child. Anyone with eyes can see that. Julie felt tears spring to her eyes. Thank you, Mrs. Drew. Call me Margaret, dear. And Julie, I want you to know that if Veronica thinks she's going to waltz back in here and take credit for the family you've built, she's going to have to go through me first. What do you mean? Scott asked. I mean, I'm going to testify on your behalf. I'm going to tell the court exactly what I've observed, that you and Julie are loving, devoted parents who have given Lily everything she needs to thrive. Margaret handed Lily back to Julie and turned to face Scott. I also need to tell you that Veronica came to see me yesterday. She what? She wanted me to support her custody claim. She told me that Julie had seduced you while you were vulnerable, that she was just a gold digger looking for financial security. What did you tell her? Margaret's expression hardened. I told her that the only person who had abandoned this family was her. I told her that I'd seen Julie with Lily, and I knew real maternal love when I saw it. And I told her that if she continued spreading lies about my son and future daughter-in-law, she would answer to me. Julie felt overwhelming gratitude toward this woman, who had initially seemed like an enemy. Mom, thank you, Scott said, his voice thick with emotion. Don't thank me yet, Margaret replied, because this is going to get ugly before it gets better. Veronica is desperate, and desperate people do terrible things. She was right. Over the next few weeks, Veronica's campaign to discredit Scott and Julie intensified. She posted cryptic messages on social media about fighting for truth and protecting innocent children. She contacted mutual friends, painting herself as a victim who had escaped an abusive marriage only to discover that her ex-husband had moved on with suspicious speed. The most painful attack came through an anonymous blog post that appeared on a local parenting website. The post, clearly written by Veronica, though she didn't sign her name, described Julie as a replacement mother who had taken advantage of a grieving widower's desperation. It says, I targeted you because you were vulnerable, Julie said, reading the post with tears in her eyes. That I used my position as a healthcare provider to manipulate you into a relationship. It also questions whether I'm fit to be a father, since I chose a woman with a history of losing children, Scott said, his voice tight with rage. She's actually using your miscarriage against you. Julie set down her phone and walked to the window, her arms wrapped around herself. Maybe she's right, Scott. Maybe I am just a replacement. Maybe what we have isn't real. Scott was beside her in an instant. Don't you dare let her poison what we have. Julie, you know who you are. You know what our relationship is. Do I? Because, reading this, seeing how she's twisting everything, it makes me wonder if I really did take advantage of your situation. Stop. Scott turned Julie to face him. Julie Candy, you saved my life and my daughter's life. You taught me how to be a father. You loved us when we were broken and helped us become whole. If that's taking advantage, then I hope you never stop. The blog post was shared widely on social media, generating dozens of comments from people who didn't know them but felt qualified to judge their relationship. Some comments were supportive, but others were cruel, questioning Julie's motives and suggesting that Scott was being manipulated. The worst came from someone who had clearly talked to Terence. I know this woman. She's unstable. She made up domestic violence claims against her ex-boyfriend, and now she's doing the same thing to this poor man's ex-wife. She's obviously desperate for a family and doesn't care who she hurts to get one. Julie read the comment and felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. They're making me sound like a predator, Scott, like some crazy woman who steals other people's families. Then we tell our side of the story, Scott said firmly. What do you mean? I mean, we stop being defensive and start being offensive. We tell people exactly what happened, exactly who you are, exactly what kind of family we've built together. 2. Days later, Scott posted a long message on his own social media accounts, along with photos of Julie and Lily together. Julie reading to Lily, Julie teaching her to clap her hands. Julie's face lit up with joy as Lily took her first steps just the week before. 6 months ago, Scott wrote, my ex-wife left our 4-month-old daughter and me with nothing but a note. I was lost, terrified, and completely unprepared to be a single parent. At 3 a.m., with a hungry baby and no formula, I knocked on a stranger's door. That stranger was Julie Candy, a pediatric nurse who had recently lost her own baby to domestic violence. Without hesitation, she fed my daughter and saved both our lives. Over the past 6 months, Julie has become more than just a caregiver. She's become the mother Lily needed and the partner I never knew I was looking for. She teaches Lily new things every day, soothes her when she's scared, and loves her with a fierceness that takes my breath away. Some people want to paint Julie as an opportunist who took advantage of my vulnerability. The truth is, Julie had nothing to gain from helping us. She has a good job, her own apartment, her own life. She chose to love us because that's who she is, someone who sees people in need and helps them. My ex-wife had 4 months to bond with our daughter and chose to leave instead. Julie has had 6 months to show Lily what unconditional love looks like, and she does it every single day. I'm proud to be marrying Julie Candy. I'm proud that Lily calls her Mama, and I'm proud of the family we've built together out of love, choice, and daily commitment to each other. If that makes me vulnerable or manipulated, then I'm grateful. For both, the post was shared hundreds of times within hours, generating an outpouring of support from friends, colleagues, and strangers who were moved by their story. The comment section filled with messages of encouragement and admiration for Julie, but it also generated backlash. Veronica's friends rallied to her defense, painting Scott as cruel and heartless for humiliating his ex-wife publicly. Some commenters accused him of airing dirty laundry and suggested that his willingness to discuss private matters proved he was unstable. I don't care what they say, Scott told Julie that evening as they read through the responses together. Let them judge us. Let them twist our words. Anyone who matters can see the truth. Julie looked at him with wonder. You defended me publicly. You put our private life out there for everyone to judge, just to protect me. I'll do it 1,000 more times if I have to, Scott said fiercely. Julie, you're my family. You're Lily's family, and I will never let anyone make you question your worth or your place in our lives. As they prepared for the custody hearing that would determine their future, Scott and Julie faced each attack together, weathered each criticism as a team, and grew stronger in their conviction that what they had built was worth fighting for. The legal battle was just beginning, but they had something Veronica didn't, the unshakable certainty that they were fighting for the right thing. They were fighting for love, for family, for the child who called them Mama and Dada, and meant it with her whole heart, and that was a battle they intended to win. Chapter 9. Choosing Family. The courthouse was packed on the morning of the custody hearing. Scott and Julie sat with David, surrounded by supporters, Margaret Drew, Dr. Peterson from Lily's pediatric office, Nancy from next door, and Sarah from the hospital. Across the aisle, Veronica sat with her lawyer, looking composed in a conservative blue dress, her hair perfectly styled. She had lost weight, and there was something brittle about her composure. Judge Harrison, a woman in her 50s with intelligent eyes, reviewed the files with careful attention. This case involves a custody dispute between Veronica Drew and Scott Drew regarding their 11-month-old daughter, Lily Drew. Ms. Drew, you left your infant daughter in October and are now seeking full custody. Please explain your reasons. Veronica stood, her voice steady, but Scott could see her hands trembling slightly. Your Honor, I was suffering from severe postpartum depression following Lily's birth. I made the agonizing decision to seek treatment rather than risk harm to my daughter. I've since received extensive therapy and am now mentally stable and ready to provide the loving home Lily deserves. Ms. Drew, I've reviewed your social media activity during the period you claim to have been seeking treatment. Can you explain the numerous posts celebrating your freedom and new life during this time? Veronica's composure flickered. Your Honor, those posts were part of my therapy process. My counselor encouraged me to focus on positive thinking and self-care as part of my recovery. Judge Harrison made a note. Mr. Drew, please tell the court about your daughter's care since October. Scott stood, his voice clear and confident. Your Honor, Lily has thrived in my care with the assistance of Julie Candy, a pediatric nurse who has been providing childcare since shortly after my wife left. Lily is healthy, happy, and securely attached to both of us. She calls Julie Mama and has done so for months. And Ms. Candy is now your fiancée? Yes, Your Honor. Julie has been more than just a caregiver. She's been Lily's mother in every way that matters. Veronica's lawyer stood. Your Honor, we're deeply concerned about Mr. Drew's hasty engagement to someone who inserted herself into this family during a vulnerable time. Ms. Candy has no legal relationship to this child and no right to replace Lily's biological mother, David responded smoothly. Your Honor, Ms. Candy's relationship with this family began with a desperate father seeking help for a hungry infant. Her feelings for Mr. Drew and Lily developed naturally over months of providing excellent care. More importantly, Lily has formed a primary attachment to Miss Candy, who has been her consistent caregiver. The judge nodded. I'd like to hear from the character witnesses. Over the next 2 hours, witness after witness testified to Scott and Julie's fitness as parents. Dr. Peterson described Lily's excellent health and clear attachment to both Scott and Julie. Margaret Drew testified that she had never seen her son happier or more confident as a father. Nancy Peterson described the transformation she'd witnessed in Scott's household, from a desperate single father to a thriving family. The most powerful testimony came from Sarah Mitchell from the hospital. Your Honor, I've worked with Julie Candy for 3 years. She's one of the most skilled pediatric nurses I've ever known, but more than that, she has an intuitive understanding of children's needs. When I heard she was caring for an infant whose mother had left, I wasn't surprised. It's exactly the kind of thing Julie would do. Veronica's case, by contrast, was thin. Her therapist testified about her current stability, but couldn't speak to her condition during the months she was absent. Her sister, who claimed Veronica had stayed with her in California, seemed nervous and gave conflicting details about the timeline. The most damaging moment came when Judge Harrison asked Veronica about her plans for childcare. I plan to be a full-time mother to Lily, Veronica said confidently. And how do you plan to support yourself and your daughter financially? You've been unemployed for 8 months. Veronica hesitated. I'm currently seeking employment, but my priority would be being present for Lily after missing so much of her early development. Ms. Drew, you have no current income, no permanent address, and no established support system. How exactly do you plan to provide stable care for an 11-month-old? I have family support. Your mother lives in Florida and is in poor health. Your sister works full-time and has 3 children of her own. Where would you and Lily live? Veronica's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. I would figure something out. I'm a mother. That has to count for something. When it came time for closing arguments, David's presentation was devastating in its simplicity. Your Honor, this case comes down to one question. What is in the best interest of Lily Drew? The evidence shows a child who has thrived in her father's care, who has formed secure attachments to both Scott Drew and Julie Candy, who is healthy, happy, and developing normally. David presented photo after photo of Lily with Scott and Julie, learning to crawl, taking first steps, laughing during bath time. In every image, Lily looked secure and joyful. Veronica Drew voluntarily abandoned her daughter and made no contact for 6 months. During that time, she celebrated her freedom on social media, while Scott Drew and Julie Candy built a loving home for Lily. Ms. Drew now returns with no income, no housing plan, asking this court to disrupt a child's secure attachment for her own convenience. Veronica's lawyer tried to argue that biological mothers deserved consideration, that postpartum depression was a serious condition, that Scott's engagement showed poor judgment. But the arguments felt weak against the overwhelming evidence of Lily's well-being. After a brief recess, Judge Harrison returned with her decision. This court's primary concern is the welfare of the child. The evidence shows clearly that Lily Drew has thrived in her father's care with Miss Candy's assistance. She is healthy, developing normally, and has formed secure attachments to both caregivers. Scott felt Julie's hand squeeze his tightly. Ms. Drew's abandonment of her daughter cannot be excused by unsubstantiated claims of mental health issues that she waited months to address. More importantly, disrupting this child's current stable environment would be traumatic and not in her best interests. Judge Harrison's voice grew firmer. Therefore, I'm granting sole physical and legal custody to Scott Drew. Ms. Drew will be granted supervised visitation for 2 hours every other Sunday, to be re-evaluated in 6 months based on her demonstration of stability and consistent involvement. In her daughter's life, Julie felt tears of relief streaming down her face. Scott pulled her close, both of them overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had just happened, but their celebration was interrupted by Veronica's breakdown. She collapsed in her chair, sobbing uncontrollably. "You can't do this. She's my daughter. She's my baby." "Ms. Drew," Judge Harrison said sternly, "you relinquished your right to call Lily your baby when you abandoned her. This court's job is to protect children, not to reward parents who abandon them." As they left the courthouse, Scott and Julie were surrounded by their supporters, everyone talking at once about the victory. But Julie found herself looking back at Veronica, who was still crying in her lawyer's arms. "I almost feel sorry for her," Julie said quietly to Scott. "She made her choices," Scott replied. "She chose to leave. She chose to stay away. She chose to celebrate her freedom instead of fighting for her family. We just chose differently." That evening, after their supporters had gone home and they'd called everyone who needed to know about the victory, Scott and Julie sat in their living room watching Lily play with her favorite stuffed elephant. The apartment was quiet except for Lily's happy babbling and the soft jazz music playing in the background. "We won," Julie said wonderingly. "She's really ours." "She was always ours," Scott replied. "Now it's just legal." As if hearing her name, Lily looked up from her toy and crawled over to them, pulling herself up on Scott's legs and reaching for Julie. "Mama! Dada!" she said clearly, clapping her hands together. Julie lifted Lily onto her lap, and Scott wrapped his arms around both of them. They sat like that for a long moment, absorbing the reality that their family was secure, legal, permanent. "Julie," Scott said eventually, his voice soft with emotion. I know we've talked about marriage, about making this official. But today, sitting in that courtroom, listening to people talk about our family, I realized I don't want to wait anymore." Julie looked up at him, her heart beginning to race. "I don't want a long engagement or a big wedding or any of the traditional stuff," Scott continued. "I just want to be your husband and Lily's legal father and start our real life together." "What are you saying?" Scott gently took Lily from Julie's lap and set her down with her toys, then got down on one knee in front of the couch. "I'm saying, Julie Candy, will you marry me? Not someday, not when everything is perfect, but soon. Will you be my wife and Lily's mama officially and help me build the family we've already started?" Julie felt tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I want to marry you. I want to be Lily's mama legally. I want all of it." Scott slipped the engagement ring he'd been carrying for weeks onto her finger. A simple solitaire that caught the light beautifully. "When?" Julie asked through her tears. "Next month, something small and simple, just us and the people who matter." "Perfect," Julie said. "I don't need a big wedding. I just need you and Lily and the promise that we're doing this forever." As if she approved of this plan, Lily crawled back over to them and pulled herself up between their legs, babbling happily. "What do you think, sweetheart?" Scott asked, lifting his daughter. "Ready to make Mama and Daddy official?" Lily responded by clapping her hands and saying, "Mama, Dada," with obvious delight. "I think that's a yes," Julie laughed. Later that evening, as they were putting Lily to bed, Scott's phone rang with news that would put the perfect cap on their perfect day. "That was David," Scott said after hanging up. "Terence was arrested last week for domestic violence against his new girlfriend. She's pregnant and she's pressing charges." Julie felt a complex mix of emotions, sadness for another woman going through what she'd experienced, but also a sense of justice finally being served. "Is she okay?" "She will be. And Julie, she mentioned you in her statement. She said hearing about your experience gave her the courage to report him." Julie felt tears spring to her eyes again, but these were different tears, tears of gratitude that her pain had helped protect someone else. "So he's finally facing consequences," she said. "Finally. And Julie, this means that chapter of your life is really closed. He can't hurt you anymore, can't spread lies about you anymore. It's over." As they stood in Lily's nursery, watching their daughter sleep peacefully in her crib, both Scott and Julie felt the weight of the day settling into something like wonder. "We did it," Julie said softly. "We actually did it. We fought for our family, and we won." "We more than won," Scott replied, pulling her close. "We built something beautiful." Outside, snow was beginning to fall, covering the world in a blanket of white. Inside, a family slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they belonged to each other, not just through love, but through law. They had started as strangers, brought together by desperation. They had become a family through choice, through daily acts of love and care, through the decision to keep showing up for each other no matter what. And now they were going to be husband and wife, father and mother, partners in every sense of the word. The battles were over. The building could begin. Chapter 10. Complete. 1 year later, the apartment that had once echoed with desperate cries now hummed with the sounds of a complete family. Julie Drew, she still felt a thrill at her married name, sat on the couch where so many important moments had happened, their 3-week-old son Michael sleeping in her arms. "Mama, book," Lily announced, toddling over with her favorite picture, book. At almost 2 years old, she was a confident little person with Scott's dark eyes and a personality entirely her own. Curious, affectionate, and completely secure in her place in the world. "Come here, sweetheart," Julie said softly, making room for Lily on the couch. "We'll read while your brother eats." Scott looked up from his laptop where he'd been responding to work emails, his face lighting up at the sight of his family arranged on the couch. Even after all this time, these quiet domestic moments still filled him with wonder. "How are my 3 favorite people doing?" he asked, closing the laptop and coming to join them. 4 favorite people, Lily corrected seriously, patting Julie's still rounded belly. "Baby Michael is people too." Julie and Scott exchanged amused glances over their daughter's head. Lily had taken to her role as big sister with enthusiasm, insisting on helping with diaper changes and singing her own made-up lullabies to her baby brother. "You're absolutely right," Scott said, settling beside them and pulling all his girls and his son close. 4 favorite people. As Julie gently shifted Michael to nurse, she felt the same sense of overwhelming gratitude that had become familiar over the past year. Their wedding had been small and perfect, just immediate family, and close friends in the same living room where Scott had proposed. Lily had been their flower girl, toddling down their makeshift aisle in a white dress, scattering rose petals and clapping her hands with delight. The pregnancy with Michael had been everything Julie's pregnancy with Hope should have been. Scott had attended every appointment, helped with morning sickness, painted the nursery while Lily helped by leaving tiny handprints on the walls that they'd decided to keep. When Julie's due date approached, Scott had taken 2 weeks off work and arranged for his mother to stay nearby, determined that Julie would never feel alone or unsupported. "Mama," Lily said, settling against Julie's side with her book. "Tell me story about when Daddy was sad and you made him happy." Julie smiled. This had become Lily's favorite bedtime story, their story, simplified for a toddler. Well, once upon a time, there was a daddy who loved his little baby girl very much, but he didn't know how to take care of her all by himself, because baby was hungry, Lily added. "That's right. So late at night, Daddy walked around looking for help, and he found a nice lady who lived across the street. The lady was very sad because she had lost her own baby, but when she heard Daddy's baby crying, she opened her door and helped them. And then what happened? The nice lady helped take care of the baby every day. She taught Daddy how to make the baby stop crying, how to make her laugh, how to help her grow big and strong, and slowly they became best friends. And then they fell in love. They did fall in love, and they got married, and the nice lady became the baby's mama forever and ever. And then they had baby Michael. Tell the part about how Daddy's heart grew bigger," Lily requested. This was Lily's addition to the story, something she'd started saying a few months ago that never failed to bring tears to Julie's eyes. "Well," Julie said, her voice growing softer, "when Daddy met Mama, his heart was small and sad, but every day that Mama loved him and loved his baby, his heart grew bigger and bigger, until it was big enough to hold all the love for their whole family." "Like the Grinch," Lily said with satisfaction. "Exactly like the Grinch," Scott agreed, his voice thick with emotion. As Lily settled into her book, occasionally pointing out pictures to baby Michael, who was now sleeping contentedly in Julie's arms, Scott found himself thinking about how different their lives could have been. "Do you ever think about it?" he asked Julie quietly. "About how we almost didn't find each other?" Julie looked at him, understanding immediately what he meant. "All the time. If Veronica had left just 1 day later, if you'd gone to a different store for formula, if I'd been working a day shift instead of nights, if you hadn't been brave enough to open your door to a stranger, if you hadn't been brave enough to ask for help." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both marveling at the chain of events that had led them here. "Sometimes I feel guilty," Julie admitted, "about being grateful that Veronica left, about being thankful that you were in such a desperate situation when we met." "I know what you mean," Scott said. "I feel guilty about being grateful that Terence showed his true colors, about being glad that you were alone and grieving when I needed you most. But then I look at this," Julie gestured to their family arranged on the couch, "and I think maybe everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to. Maybe we needed to be broken before we could fit together," Scott mused. "Maybe we needed to lose everything before we could appreciate what we found." Their philosophical conversation was interrupted by Lily announcing that she needed to use the potty, and the next few minutes were consumed with the practical realities of toddler care. By the time they'd sorted that out and convinced Lily it was time for her nap, Michael was awake and ready for his afternoon feeding. As Julie settled into the rocking chair in what had been Lily's nursery and was now Michael's, Scott came to stand beside them, just as he had so many times during those early days when Julie had fed Lily. "Do you remember the first time you sat in this chair?" Scott asked, gently stroking Michael's dark hair. I remember thinking I'd never felt anything so right and so heartbreaking at the same time, Julie said. Holding Lily felt like holding the baby I'd lost and the future I didn't know I could have all at once. I remember thinking you were the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. Not because of how you looked, but because of how you loved her immediately, completely, without asking for anything in return. Julie looked up at him with wonder. After all this time, after everything we've been through, you still look at me like that. Like what? Like I'm something miraculous. Scott leaned down to kiss her forehead. You are something miraculous. You're the woman who saved my life in every way a person can be saved. Scott, let me finish, he said gently. Julie, before I met you, I was existing but not really living. I was going through the motions of being a father without understanding what it really meant. You didn't just help me take care of Lily. You taught me how to love her properly, how to see her as a person instead of just a responsibility. Julie felt tears spring to her eyes. You did the same thing for me. You gave me a family when I thought I'd never have one. You looked at a broken woman who'd lost everything and saw someone worth loving. You weren't broken, Scott said firmly. You were hurt, but you weren't broken. And you proved that every day by choosing to love us even when it scared you. Michael finished nursing and fell asleep in Julie's arms, his tiny face peaceful and content. Julie looked down at her son, her biological child, but no more precious to her than the daughter sleeping in the next room who she'd chosen and who had chosen her. Sometimes I dream about hope, Julie said quietly. Not sad dreams anymore, but peaceful ones. I dream that she's watching over us, that she's happy we found each other. I think she would be happy, Scott said. I think she'd love knowing that her mama found a family to love, that her short life led to something beautiful. Michael finished nursing and fell asleep in Julie's arms, his tiny face peaceful and content. Julie looked down at her son, her biological child, but no more precious to her than the daughter sleeping in the next room who she'd chosen and who had chosen her. Sometimes I dream about hope, Julie said quietly. Not sad dreams anymore, but peaceful ones. I dream that she's watching over us, that she's happy we found each other. I think she would be happy, Scott said. I think she'd love knowing that her mama found a family to love, that her short life led to something beautiful. Do you think Lily will understand someday? About Veronica, about how we really met? Scott considered this. I think when she's older, we'll tell her the whole truth, about how people sometimes make choices that hurt the people they're supposed to love, but how love can heal those hurts and create something new. And about how families aren't just about biology, but about choice and commitment and showing up every day. Exactly.